Chapter 3 A Long and Illustrious History. Early Britain. The first people to live in Britain were hunter-gatherers, in what we call the Stone Age. For much of the Stone Age, Britain was connected to the continent by a land bridge. People came and went, following the herds of deer and horses which they hunted. Britain only Britain only became permanently separated from the continent by the Channel about 10,000 years ago. The first farmers arrived in Britain about 6,000 years ago. The ancestors of these first farmers probably came from southeast Europe. These people built houses, tombs, and monuments on the land. One of these monuments, Stonehenge, still hangs in what is now the English county of Wiltshire. Stonehenge was probably a special gathering place for seasonal ceremonies. Other Stonehenge sites have also survived. Scarborough-on-Orkney, off the north coast of Scotland, is the best preserved prehistoric village in northern Europe and has helped archaeologists to understand more about how people lived near the end of the Stone Age. Archaeologists. The World Heritage the World Heritage the World Heritage Site of Stonehenge. The World Heritage Site of Stonehenge. Around 4,000 years ago, people learned to make bones. We call this period the Bronze Age. People lived in round houses and buried their dead in tombs called round barrows. The people of the Bronze Age were accomplished metal workers who make many beautiful objects in bronze and gold, including tools, ornaments, and weapons. The Bronze Age was followed by the Iron Age, when people learned how to make weapons and tools out of iron. People still lived in round houses, grounded together into large settlements, and sometimes defended sites called hill forts. A very impressive hill fort can still be seen today at Maiden Castle, in the English county of Dorset. Most people were farmers, craft workers, or warriors. The language they spoke was part of the Celtic language family. Similar languages were spoken across Europe in the Iron Age. The related languages are still spoken today in some parts of Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. The people of the Iron Age had a sophisticated culture and economy. They make the first coins to be minted in Britain, some inscribed with the names of Iron Age kings. This marks the beginnings of British history. The Romans. Julius Caesar led a Roman invasion of Britain in 55 BC. This was unsuccessful, and for nearly 100 years Britain remained separate from the Roman Empire. In AD 43, the Emperor Claudius led a Roman army in a new invasion. This time, there was resistance from some of the British tribes, but the Romans were successful in occupying almost all of Britain. One of the tribal leaders who fought against the Romans was Boudicca, the queen of the Isle in what is now eastern England. She is still remembered today, and there is a statue of her, and there is a statue of her on Westminster Bridge in London. In London. She is still remembered today, and there is a statue of her on Westminster Bridge in London, near the House of Parliament. Areas of what is now Scotland were never conquered by the Romans, and the Emperor Hadrian built a wall in the north of England to keep out the pigs. Hadrians. Included in the wall were a number of forts. Parts of Hadrian's Wall, including the forts of Houserath and Windolander, can still be seen. It is a popular area for walkers and is a UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization World Heritage Site. World Heritage Site. The Romans remained in Britain for 400 years. They built roads and public buildings, created a structure of law and introduced new plants and animals. It was during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD that the first Christian communities began to appear in Britain. The Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons. The Roman army left Britain in AD 410 to defend other parts of Roman Empire and never returned. Britain was again invaded by tribes from northern Europe, the Jews, the Anglos and the Saxons. The languages they spoke are the basic of modern-day English. Battles were fought against these invaders, but by about AD 600, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were established in Britain. These kingdoms were mainly in what is now England. The burial place of one of the kings was at Sultan Hoo in modern Suffolk. This king was buried with treasure and armor, all placed in a ship which was then covered by a mound of earth. Parts of the rest of Britain, including much of what is now Wales and Scotland, remained free of Anglo-Saxon rule. An Anglo-Saxon hermit found at Sultan Hoo are currently on display at the British Museum. The Anglo-Saxons were lost Christians when they first came to Britain, but during this period, missionaries came to Britain to preach about Christianity. Missionaries from Ireland spread the religion in the north. The most famous of these was St. Patrick, who would become the patron saint of Ireland, and St. Columba, who founded a monastery on the island of Lorna, off the coast of what is now Scotland. St. Augustine led missionaries from Rome, who spread Christianity in the south. St. Augustine became the first Archbishop of Canterbury. The Vikings came from Denmark and Norway. They first visited Britain in AD 789 to raid coastal towns and take away goods and slaves. Then they began to stay and form their own communities in the east of England and Scotland. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in England united under King Alfred the Great. who defeated the Vikings. Many of the Vikings invaded stayed in Britain, especially in the east and north of England, in an area known as the Danelaw. Many place names there, such as Grimsby, and Scotland, come from the Viking languages. The Viking settlers mixed with local communities and some converted to Christianity. Anglo-Saxon kings continued to rule what is now England, except for a short period when there were Danish kings. The first of these was Crunch, also called Canute. In the north, the threat of attack by Vikings had encouraged the people to unite under one king, Kenneth MacAlpin. The term Scotland began to be used to describe that country. The Norman conquest. In 1066, an invasion led by William, the Duke of Normandy, in what is now northern France, defeated Harold, the Saxon king of England, at the Battle of Hastings. Harold was killed in the battle. William became king of England and is known as William the Conqueror. The battle is commemorated in the great piece of embroidery known as the Basest Tapestry, which can still be seen in France today. The Norman conquest was the last successful foreign invasion of England and led to many changes in government and social structures in England. Norman French, the language of the new ruling class, influenced the development of the English language as we know it today. As we look at today, initially, the Normans also conquered Wales, but the Welsh gradually won territory back. The Scots and the Normans fought on the border between England and Scotland. The Normans took over some land on the border but did not embrace Scotland. William sent people all over England to draw up lists of all the towns and villages, the people who lived there, who owned the land, and what animals they owned were also listed. This was called the Domesday Book. It still exists today and gives a picture of society in England just after the Norman conquest. The Middle Ages. War at home and abroad. The period after the Norman conquest up until about 1485 is called the Middle Ages, or the medieval period. It was a time of almost constant war. The English kings fought with the Welsh, Scottish, and Irish noblemen for control of their lands. In Wales, the English were able to establish their rule. In 1284, King Edward I of England introduced the Statute of Robdon, which annexed Wales to the crown of England. Huge castles, including Conwy and Carnarvon, were built to maintain this power. By the middle of the 15th century, the last Welsh rebellions had been defeated. English laws and English language were introduced. In Scotland, the English kings were next several. In 1314, the Scottish, led by Robert the Bruce, defeated the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. The Scotland remained unconquered by the English. At the beginning of the Middle Age, Ireland was an independent country. The English first went to Ireland as troops, as troops to help the Irish king and remained to build their own settlements. By 1200, the English ruled an area of Ireland known as the Pale around Dublin. Some of the important lords in other parts of Ireland accepted the authority of the English king. During the Middle Age, the English kings also fought a number of wars abroad. Many chiefs took part in the process, in which European Christians fought for control of the Holy Land. English kings also fought a long war with France, called the 100 Years' War, even though it actually lasted 116 years. One of the most famous battles of the 100 Years' War was the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where King Henry V vastly outnumbered the English army, defeated the French. The English left France in the 1450s. The Black Death. The Normans used a system of land ownership known as feudalism. The king gave land to his lords in return for help in war. Landowners had to send certain numbers of men to serve in the army. Some peasants had their own land, but most were serfs. They had a small area of their northland where they could grow fruit, and in return they had to work for their lord and collect mulcting. The same system developed in southern Scotland. In the north of Scotland and Ireland, land was owned by members of the clans, prominent families. In 1348, a disease, probably a form of plague, came to Britain. This was known as the Black Death. 1/3 of the population of England died, and a similar proportion in Scotland and Wales. This was one of the worst disasters even to strike Britain. Following the Black Death, the smaller population meant there was less land to grow cereal crops. There were labor shortages and peasants began to demand higher wages. New social classes appeared, including owners of land around areas of land later called the gentry. The people left the countryside to live in the towns. In the towns, growing wealth led to the development of a strong middle class. In Ireland, the Black Death killed money in the poor, and for a time, the area controlled by the English became smaller. Legal and political changes. In the Middle Ages, parliaments began to develop into the institution it is today. Its origins can be traced to the King's Council of Advisors, which included important noblemen and the leaders of the Church. There were few formal limits to the king's power until 1215. In that year, King John was forced by his noblemen to agree to a number of demands. The result was a Charter of Rights called the Magna Carta, which means the Great Chapter. The Magna Carta established the idea that even the king was subject to the law. It protected the rights of the nobility and restricted the king's power to collect tax or to make or change laws. In future, the king would need to involve his noblemen in decisions. In England, parliaments were called for the king to consult his nobles, particularly when the king needs to raise money. The numbers attending parliament increased, and two separate parts, known as houses, were established. The nobility, great landowners, and bishops sat in the House of Kings, lives, who were usually smaller landowners, and wealthy people from towns and cities were elected to sit in the House of Commons. Only a small part of the population was able to join in electing the members of the Commons. The similar parliament developed in Scotland. It had three houses called the Estate: the Lords, the Commons, and the clergy. This was also a time of developments in the legal system. The principle that judges are independent of the government began to be established. In England, judges developed the common law by a process of um, process of procedures, following previous decisions. And tradition. In Scotland, the legal system developed slightly differently, and laws were codified, that's written down.